for being here for the first part of the show. But before you continue on to look at feedback, Simon Peter Murimi says, what is the one direct benefit I stand to gain from being counted? Don't tell me that the stats will be used for planning. Planning in Kenya is unknown. As Jack Shege says, what do I benefit from census? Is it just another political exercise? FYI, kwangu kuna mbwa kali and you're not welcome in my house. Hata mlango siwezi fungwa.
Hey, Brian Okech Amwai says government projects are most, if not all the time, marked with malpractice, that even if we are assured that the selection process was fair, it's hard to believe. But then again, they can never admit to it, can they?
Yeah, I want to go to the frequently asked questions, and I think the census team has today been answering the question all day on what the census data is for. And in their frequently asked questions, they asked, what are the uses of the census data? And I'll just read what they say. This is from the KNBS. The census provides comprehensive and disaggregated information. The data, when analyzed, gives an accurate picture of how many people are living in the country, the distribution across every administrative level, and their living conditions, as well as access to basic services. Other uses include resource allocation, delineation of boundaries, research, and creation of household-based frames for future surveys. And I would say in the politics of census, that last sentence is the most important, which is they are calling it other uses: resource allocation, delineation of boundaries, research and creation of household-based
and I think
frames.
You said in sharing of revenue, the principle of population, I think, is a very high consideration when you're sharing revenue in counties. And I think that's one of the politics of numbers that comes with the census.
Absolutely. In fact, there's an SMS I want to read here from a gentleman whose name is not there on SMSs. Being a BSc IT degree graduate, together with other graduates from various universities, we applied for the census vacancies in Larry constituency. I didn't understand why, despite having qualified for all the positions, I was denied and even an opportunity to serve as an enumerator, while a recent Form 4 leaver was considered for interviews. The entire hiring process is a sham. I wish McDonald was here to answer to that question. But data, information is critical, number one. Number two, numbers. Everything around here. Talk about boundaries delimitation, talk about revenue sharing. Numbers are critical. 45% in the revenue sharing formula, 45% accounts for the population. So the more you have in terms of numbers, the more you will have in terms of resources. And so this explains why even leaders in various places are jittery about this process, and they would want it to go very well. In fact, don't even be surprised if some would want to play games with it. I hear it's called gerrymandering, so that eventually they will end up with more numbers. You remember in 2009, the numbers were not conclusive. Why? Because there were allegations that some figures were spiked in some areas, and there were also concerns that some numbers were not adding up in other areas. So this time, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics will need to be very, very careful to ensure that the numbers reflect the very people who are in those localities, such that eventually when resources are shared, you will not hear of complaints that why is a certain area getting more resources than another area. So that ultimately these resources will go to the directly to the people, so that they can serve them in terms of service delivery and everything else. So the eyes are basically on Kenya National Bureau of Statistics.
Yeah, I think you raise a very important issue here on the resource versus numbers battle. And Kenya is yet to make that transition to where it ought to be when it comes to the relationship between resources and the numbers. In the era of urbanization, it adds up that a lot of people will be moving from rural areas to urban centers, regardless the part of the country you're talking about. You go to the estates in Nairobi right now, and you can't really allocate an estate to a particular region. So some of this reasoning really needs to transition. But I just want to share a small story about the census in Nigeria, because Nigeria has a very, very interesting perspective of this battle between numbers and resources. The first census was in 1960, too. And Nigeria has this divide between the north and the south, a very stiff competition between those two regions. And that year, the south thought, the census is the way to beat the north. We must prove that we have the numbers from this end. That then means that the resources from the national government ought to be allocated more to this end. The story has never changed. Subsequent census exercises in Nigeria have been attended to by that kind of gerrymandering, playing with numbers, tweaking things up and down, because the growth then became, the numbers became untrustworthy. You don't trust what you get. There is, for example, if you read their story, a huge gap of how the country moved from a population of 70 to 140 million. And then to 2009, moving to 200 million. And now we're talking about close to 250 million. We do not know the Nigerian numbers because there's this constant politicization, weaponization of numbers. Is it here in this country? Yes. It is. Look at the 2009 controversy. What was the most controversial aspect in 2009? It was the Somali numbers. It was the Somali numbers. I mean, we can count in this, on NewsGuide tonight, they are one. But in 2009, the numbers were disputed that because the numbers had indicated that the Somali population was now among the big tribes of the country. And that was disputed. The matter ended up in court, and the numbers were restored later. We want to see what the politics would be in 2019.
Speaking as Gashuri, I need to respond
to Somali numbers again. It could be Maasai numbers this time.
The Somali numbers, actually, I to some extent, I felt that were higher than they were. We have an average of about 7-8 children per family, but hey, we'll see what the census says. But now, another issue I'd like to discuss, Gashuri and Linus, is that this process will cost us 18.5 billion shillings. And some people are saying that is a lot of money, considering the fact that we already gather data about people all the time. When you're applying for ID, we had the recent Huduma number that cost about 6 billion shillings. And we've been asked by a lot of people, why didn't we do the counting when you're registering for Huduma number? Tulitumia 6 billion then. Now we are using 18.5 billion shillings. And when we already have data at our disposal, why do you have to do this whole process all over again? Because as you see already, there's a lot of resistance to this. There are a lot of people, the number of people who are telling us, mimi mtu asikuje kwangu, sitamfungulia mlango. There are those who are saying, like what happened in Kangemi, that mimi mtu ambaye sijui simfungulie mlango. So already this process is facing a lot of resistance in terms of people do not feel maybe included. And this happened even with the Huduma number, remember, where people saying, mimi sijui nini naendelea, I was not informed, I was not aware, I was not consulted. And for me, that should be worrying in terms of now we're spending all this money, but already kuna hii resistance. And why we have data, we have a lot of it. Tunatumia na kadi ngapi NHIF, NSSF, uko na ID, uko na birth certificate, uko na passport. Do you have to spend 18.5 billion kujua watu ni wangapi katika taifa hili?
Well, it's a discussion that will not end in a few days or a few months. It's a discussion that continues for years and years. Why? Because the government every time justifies these kind of projects. I mean, you remember even when we hosted the PS for Interior Affairs here, Dr. Karanja Kibicho, on the Huduma number question, he gave a clear case for why Huduma number had to be there. And still now, very many people are not yet clear why their details were taken for Huduma number, or eventually whether the Huduma number will replace the national identity card number or thereabout. That's a story for another day. But on the other hand, when you talk about 18.5 billion shillings, it's a huge figure. And obviously it's bound to raise questions on how this money is going to be spent, though largely it will go to allowances for personnel that will be doing the enumeration and so on and so forth. But I would be more interested in what becomes of the data that is collected using these 18.5 billion shillings. Will it be utilized effectively? Will it be used to enhance service delivery? Will it aid in better planning in our country? If we collect this data and then eventually you lock it somewhere for other reasons and you don't actually use it for purposes of planning so that people have effective service delivery at the local level, then it will beat the purpose. 18.5 billion shillings is an investment whose return must be seen to the Kenyan people via service delivery. It should be able to help the country plan better on matters of education, plan better on matters of health, plan better on infrastructure, plan better on who is where and requires what. If that data is used effectively, then there will be value for the money that will be spent. When
we speak about the politics, Gashure, Linus, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute there. We talk about some 27 constituencies, which are worried to some extent. I don't know if this would come to pass, but when the boundaries delimitations was done years back, there were constituencies that were created. But then there are those that have less than 133,000 people who may be in danger of having to be merged to some extent. But now looking at the numbers that we have, I think looking at the voter register, there are some 27 constituencies which have less than 133,000 votes. And already we are seeing jitters, and they read an article in the newspaper where those constituencies now are starting to get worried. I think they'll be swallowed up by others if that is, the census shows that 133,000 voters are not registered in that constituency.
I'll let Linus deal with that, because census, in so much as it is a planning purpose, it's for planning purposes, it's also a very political process, because the exercise that will follow the census is boundaries delimitation. And what will IEBC use? It will use the numbers, the data that will be generated from the census 2019. So the politicians will be very key and keen in seeing how this exercise is conducted, because the 27 constituencies that we're talking about were protected constituencies, but that protection is ending once we do the boundaries delimitation this year. So if they didn't meet the numbers, then definitely when the boundaries are reviewed, they are likely to be merged with other constituencies. We are likely to create some more constituencies elsewhere while the numbers have increased. Because ultimately, what are constituencies for? They are for representation. What are you representing, or who are you representing? You're representing people. So if a constituency doesn't meet the criteria, then that opportunity for a constituency will go to another area that has numbers that require representation. Therein lies the question of politics in the census.
And the one thing I'm not sure, Francis, is how soon this data will be available for such use. And maybe going forward we should be talking to the IEBC to help us understand the process of the delimitation. But look, the data, and one of the frequently asked questions is, will data on ethnic composition be collected? That is a question that was answered here by the KNBS. And they say, yes, information on tribe or ethnicity and nationality will be collected due to its statistical and cultural value. The data is used to assess the socioeconomic characteristics of people of differing backgrounds and in the identification of minority groups. This exercise, no doubt, very, very important exercise. Because if you look at most content that is out there, when you're looking for statistics, unfortunately you have to rely on external numbers, sometimes from the World Bank, sometimes from other organizations. It'll be nice and good for the country that we have a Kenya National Bureau of Statistics that can give us information about our own country, about our own numbers, break it down to data that can be used by government, county government, institutions when they are doing the planning. Now, the issue of 18.5 billion shillings, that is only 500 million short of what the DCI, the DPP, ESCC is questioning about the money that was lost in Aror Kimorer. I mean, just that tells you how much we lose in corruption. Now, the people in government to make the decisions will have, there has to be this conscientious thing, and they do that when they swear oath of office. Conscience, the role of conscience in what you do. You can't just say we are government and government works this way. why we had a very different exercise in census and Huduma number is still beats logic. Is it something those in government would have done if they were in private sector? No, it doesn't work that way. Because you look at the Huduma number registration, that could comfortably have been done alongside the census. They're coming with the same gadgets, I think.
Yes.
The electronic gadgets. This is information they can capture on the same night. Side by side, and save money. It should have cost us less than 18 billion.
There's a gentleman called...
And then, sorry, you mentioned about the Thika Road. If Thika Road was a human being, then the red line it has would be exactly its version of Huduma number. It would be asking, by the way, what's this red line all about, the BRT number? Because up to now, and you can see in our Twitter feed, people are asking, what happened? We have the Huduma numbers, and so what next?
In fact, there's a gentleman called...
Thika Road is asking the same question about the BRT.
About the BRT. Mahad Abdi is asking, Ethiopia with over 100 million people are using approximately 6 billion shillings, while us Kenyans with 50 million or thereabout are using 18 billion shillings. Are we serious?
Are we serious? We're not serious, I think. And we need to wind up. Just one final comments. Gashuri, about the BBI. Vikao vimekamilika, wamezungumza kote nchini. People have given their opinion. But is it really what people said that may end up being contained in the report, considering that what we are hearing around here, that unakumbuka what you say? Swali haliko, jibu lishapatikana. We're just looking for the question. You already have the answer.
Maybe not. Let me say maybe not. Because the Building Bridges Initiative team went to various places across the country, sat, listened to people, make submissions on how they would want the 9 issues raised by the president and the ODM leader during that handshake, what you call the 9-point agenda. People gave submissions on various issues on how they would want those, what you call historical issues, resolved. But there were 2 fundamental issues that came up. Number one, there was a question of who came before BBI and how did they end up before BBI. There were serious allegations that some of the people who appeared before BBI were quote-unquote choreographed. They came with predetermined submissions and so on and so forth. And there are also questions of the criteria used to arrive at who will appear before BBI. But BBI has a very good opportunity to discount the allegations of bias and premeditation in terms of the outcome. They have gone on a retreat to prepare the report that they are going to hand over to the president and to the ODM leader. The BBI team has a very good opportunity to tell those who are critical of it that, by the way, this is what you're saying and this is what we have ended up with. This is what was said by people who appeared before us, and this is how it is contained in our report. And ultimately, whether the report, the recommendations tally with the recommendations made before the BBI team in those public hearings and the memoranda is something that will be very, very interesting to watch.
Because Gashuri, we were asking, has anyone gone to any of the vikaos na kutoa maoni yake? I didn't hear anyone saying that they have. But Linus, already there's opposition from within Jubilee itself to the BBI and its activities.
BBI was formed by President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. I do not know what they are writing right now, but my take is whatever they'll come out with will reflect the wishes of the 2 principals, the 2 persons behind the BBI initiative. Remember, there was a 9-point list that ended up in the formation of this BBI, and I think, apart from reflecting what they would have been told in those sessions, they'll also reflect the wishes and political plans of Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. That's the bottom line.
We need to wind up.
Lastly,
yes.
I attended a few of them, and I did various stories on some of the submissions that were made before BBI. One predominant submission was about inclusivity. Now, how BBI team interprets this inclusivity question will also be very interesting to watch. Does inclusivity mean expanding the executive? Does inclusivity mean making sure that resources are equitably shared such that somebody in Turkana, somebody in Lamu, somebody in Kiambu, somebody in Migori, somebody in Kericho, somebody in Wajir feels that our area has been factored in the sharing of the national cake? The interpretation of the inclusivity question will be interesting. And the producers of this show called BBI, the president and the former prime minister, have repeatedly spoken about inclusivity. And one time when they were in Kisumu, the president himself talked about this winner takes it all mentality. How the BBI team deals with that question, or the recommendations it will make to cure that question that the president says is a reason for perennial fights every 5 years when we go to the ballot, is something that will be very interesting to watch. Okay, something very interesting to watch. Gashuri, Linus, thank you. Now we are finishing the show, so it's time for the final word.